From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm Tom Rogan, the host. This week's guests are the familiar faces of Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, and Pat Buchanan. And our guest this week is Kerry Picket from the Washington Examiner. Welcome, Kerry. On that note, we should get to our first issue, which is issue 1, Trump and Kenosha.
I think the press is actually, the media is what's fueling this, more so than even Biden, because Biden doesn't know he's alive.
Visiting Kenosha, Wisconsin this week, President Trump doubled down on 2 of his central re-election narratives. That it is the Trump campaign against the media elite, and that Trump alone can deliver security to American streets. Joe Biden, the president says, will only deliver more chaos. Unsurprisingly, the Democratic presidential nominee disagrees. He says that Mr. Trump is stoking a toxic anger and fueling disorder. But having played down rioting over recent months, Biden this week took a tougher stance against criminal violence. Pat, do you think the growing disorder is really giving President Trump a lifeline back into this race, at least in terms of the polls?
I think I would certainly say yes, but let me say this about Trump's trip to Kenosha. It was bold, it was risky, it was defiant, and it was successful. What he said, in effect, was, I'm not going to be intimidated by mobs, and I don't care what the governor and mayor say, I'm going in there. So that was very helpful to him. He elevated the issue of riots and law and order to the primary issue. He takes a hard line on that, and that's successful. Democrats, I think, are on the defensive. And again, Biden is out of the basement, and clearly this is an achievement. I think I talked about it about a couple of weeks ago or last week, that this was the thing that was going to drive Biden out, and he's done it. So I think Trump is driving the issue right now, and the key issue as of now is the riots and disorder, Kenosha, Seattle, Portland.
Eleanor, your thoughts?
Biden successfully turned the tables on the president on this particular issue by basically challenging the president to condemn all violence from all sides. The president compares the shooting of a black man in the back 7 times by a cop to a golfer choking on the golf course. And he is praising the 17-year-old self-styled vigilante who killed 2 people and injured a 3rd. So the president hasn't said anything about violence when it's perpetrated by his allies, including a caravan of Trump allies who went into the city of Kenosha and fired paintballs, or was it Portland? I frankly confused the 2. So we've come out of the conventions. The polls show that neither candidate got a bump, and the president is trying very hard to focus on violence in the streets, hoping to scare white suburbia. But you know, white suburbia cares about COVID because their kids are going back to school, and they're worried about the economy because a lot of people have lost their jobs. Trump carried white America by 20 points in 2016. He's got a lead now of 9 points. I don't think you can scare people to get back the voters that he's lost.
Kerry, one of the things we saw on Wednesday was Joe Biden calling for prosecutions of the police officers who shot Jacob Blake. Do you think that will be helpful to the Biden campaign, or do you think that it might play to President Trump's hand that the Democratic Party has moved to the left in politicizing playing against police officers, as President Trump would present?
I don't think that it will necessarily help the Biden campaign because this particular case is still under investigation. We still don't have all the details. And right now, the Biden campaign is trying to sort of split the baby here and trying to get people to understand that they are for law and order, while also saying that they are also trying to say that they are not for police brutality, at the same time trying to get that BLM support. But at the same time, BLM is also losing support drastically by the polls. So one of the hardest things is that while you have the Biden campaign saying that Donald Trump is not a leader, what's happening? He's following him. all over the place, particularly to Kenosha, right after he said that he wouldn't go to Kenosha when Donald Trump went to Kenosha himself. So he's particularly following Donald Trump's steps. He's letting Donald Trump dictate his own campaign.
Clarence, do you think that President Trump is playing a dangerous game here, in the sense that as much as people may be increasingly concerned about security, President Trump is not using the language of conciliation? He is doubling down on those harder-edged tones.
Well, President Trump is indeed driving this story because he is the one who has been using urban violence as a distraction from the coronavirus crisis, which he's doing very poorly in the polls when it comes to rating his response to that. And he's tried a number of things against Joe Biden, calling him socialist, et cetera, et cetera. He finally found a sticky issue here because the rioters and looters in Portland in particular haven't let up. And so a problem broke out in Wisconsin, which was unrelated, but nevertheless, just the fact that they had a riot up there, this enabled Trump to go and turn and say, there, you see these Democrat-run cities, Democrat-run states, crime is running rampant. Crime is not running rampant. And by the way, he doesn't talk about the Republican cities like well, I could name several that where crime has gone up here in the past year, but he doesn't talk about them. In other words, he's trying to link Democrats to crime. At the same time, he's not showing a respect for order by saying, well, the governor and the mayor don't want me to come in there, but I'm coming in anyway. Now, that kind of disobedience, I don't know how you square those two messages, but he's Donald Trump.
All right, so let's do one more round robin, and then we'll go on to the next issue. Pat.
Look, Joe Biden looks like a 98-pound weakling here. I mean, Trump drove him out to Pittsburgh, forced him out of his basement. Now he's going to go to Wisconsin. Now he's denouncing violence and all the rest of it. And Kerry is correct. Biden's got a terrible problem here. He's got the AOC, BLM folks who are on one side, who believe what they're doing is a great moral cause. And on the other side, he's got what you can call the Scranton Democrats, the Pennsylvania working class he came from. These two have dramatically different views. The American people, and they don't want the President of the United States coming out and visiting with some lawyer in Des Moines. What they want is action to deal with the riots and disorders that have been going on almost 100 days now. They've had enough of it. And again, Joe Biden testifies to the truth of that by his own behavior.
Okay, 3 minutes left. Eleanor.
Pat is drawing lines that don't exist. AOC and BLM do not favor violence. Nobody favors violence. The law and order theme is basically cover for authoritarian action, and it's Donald Trump's effort to distract from the fact that 1,000 Americans die every day. We're in a couple of weeks going to hit 200,000 lives lost. All those people that Pat thinks are sitting around worrying about Attorney Crump and what's going on in these other cities, they're worrying about their kids going to school, and they're not going to be so foolish as to believe that the violence is coming to the city near them. This is Charlottesville all over again. There are good people on both sides. A president fanning the flames of unrest from the Oval Office because he thinks it's his ticket to re-election.
Kerry.
I'm sorry, Eleanor, but the New York Times itself said that Wisconsin voters were already being swayed by what they were seeing over in Kenosha. And Clarence, look, what we're seeing in these Democratic-run cities are these huge spikes in crime. New York City is a perfect example.
And Republican cities.
Specifically, overwhelmingly Democratic-run cities. New York City,
because they're overwhelmingly Democratic. Most of the cities are Democratic. I mean, that's
New York City,
circular.
Chicago, which you know very well, Los Angeles. All right. Yes. All right. We're also seeing specifically huge spikes in crime. And what are they doing? They are defunding these police departments where they want to reimagine Yes, they are. Okay, they want to
Minneapolis did.
remove.
That's all. Chicago's raising its police budget if we can, and so are a number of other
Where they
cities.
want to reimagine police, and where they want to, or rather reimagine policing, or they want to actually take the money and move it someplace else. And they can say, well, we're not actually defunding police, we're actually just moving it someplace else. So that's not actually defunding. So they can use semantics and say that they're not defunding it, but they actually are. It's the same thing. And now what we're seeing in New York is we're seeing attempted rapes over in the subway. We're seeing shootings through the roof. I mean, what we're seeing are huge crime spikes. And yes, people in the suburbs are scared. People in the cities are scared.
All right, Clarence, final word, sir.
Well, I don't want to get into a lot of detail on this, but check out Camden, New Jersey. They did defund their police a few years back, and the crime rate went down because the state took over those functions. But that's not what that movement is about. They're talking about not reducing law enforcement. They're talking about increasing the social services because cops are called too often to stop. Most of them are domestic calls that they're not equipped to really handle. And there are ways to make policing more efficient, but it's hard. It's almost impossible to have an intelligent discussion about law enforcement in an election year, especially a heavy campaign year with a president like Trump who's trying to use crime to dodge the central issue right now, which is the pandemic. So we will our talks will continue.
Well said, Clarence, and I'm sure we will come back to this important issue. Anyway, we will move on. Issue 2, silence of the Biden.
Speaking in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden this week addressed the civil unrest grappling the nation. President Trump, Mr. Biden says, is failing to lead. But when it comes to the media, which is largely supportive of Mr. Biden, there's no question that the Democratic nominee is failing to take many questions, as was the case following Biden's Pennsylvania speech this week. While the former vice president has conducted some local news interviews, his recent schedule has included no major network interviews. The McLaughlin Group notes that Mr. Biden is most welcome to join our fourth chair anytime, as is President Trump.
And an update from Mr. Biden.
If I was asked to shut everything down, I took that as a generic question, am I going to follow the science? I am going to insist, and I insist now without any authority, that every responsible person in this country, when they're out in public or not with a cohort that they have lived with because they know they haven't spread it to your husband, wife, etc., that they wear a mask.
So, Eleanor, Joe Biden taking a few questions there, none of the big Sunday shows yet. And how would you say that the Biden campaign can square his comments there in terms of wearing a mask in public with the gradual reopening we have seen in some places, restaurants, for example, allowing patrons from different families to attend?
He took questions from the traveling press corps, which he'll probably do more of. When you're in an election where it's going to be a referendum on the incumbent, and the incumbent is out there every day saying the most ridiculous things, you just let the focus stay on the incumbent. So there's not much of an incentive for Biden to be drawing attention to himself. He did deliver 2 very good speeches this week. One, as I mentioned earlier, returned the tables on the president in terms of who's really condemning violence. And then second, speaking to an issue that's at the heart of many families, which is going back to school and the need for a general plan. Specifically on masks, he had suggested that as president, he would put in place a mandate to wear masks. That's unconstitutional. And so he made that point. He said, I'm a constitutionalist, but he would urge mask wearing. And I think you can't talk to any public health expert who will say that Trump did the right thing by being so defiant about not wearing a mask, by tweeting liberate to people who were protesting with their guns and not wearing masks. So leading by example is very important. And in this period where the president has basically walked away from trying to combat the coronavirus, I think Biden is stepping into the void here, and I think it's a smart play on his part.
Pat, is Joe Biden taking a gamble here that with the move towards winter, COVID might spike again? Because it seems that the COVID attention in the country has sort of dissipated in favor of concern about criminality. Do you think there's a risk here for Joe Biden?
I think what Biden is doing is he's cleaning up the messes he's made earlier, whether it's on fracking or whether it's on wearing a mask, or whether it's on violence, does he tolerate it? Every case here, Biden is coming out, he's very defensive, he's trying to answer charges against him. And again, you might disagree with Donald Trump, but he looks authoritative as a leader, as someone who's decisive, who knows his views, who knows where he's going. And I think this is an intangible quality that Joe Biden, simply, who is a nice guy, apparently, very nice guy, does not project strong leadership.
Kerry, do you think there's a challenge to Eleanor's point to President Trump, in the sense that in the beginning we did see these tweets that the COVID crisis is exaggerated, that it is perhaps something that Democrats are playing up too much? And in reality, we have seen the body count rise, and perhaps Joe Biden now looks like the more serious person to lead us through the final stages of it.
Certainly. I mean, those were comments that were being made by Trump in the very beginning, but he was working off of information that was being given to him, not just from the media, but also from a number of governmental sources, also from international sources. And not only was he reacting to it, but the media themselves were reacting, saying that it wasn't a big deal. You also had Nancy Pelosi, who was in Chinatown, saying it's not a big deal. De Blasio was doing the same thing. So everybody was reacting to the information that was being given to them. But as far as Joe Biden was concerned with the mask, remember, it wasn't so much that he said there has to be this mask mandate. It was what he said after it. When he said it's not about your rights, it's about your responsibilities as an American citizen. That's what really sort of stuck in everybody's craw. So, and then that was like that main sort of quote that everyone put out on Twitter. It's not about our rights. Hold on a second here. And that was the main mess that he's really cleaning up now. Now he's saying, I'm going to go tell governors instead that I'm just going to sort of pressure them and tell them, it's really important to make sure that your constituents are out there wearing masks. I'm going to pressure them. Well, what does he mean by pressure? And I think that's the big question that we have to start thinking about.
Clarence, we'll go to you as the last word, but feel free to take your time with it. But just, I'd like you to pick on, though, Clarence, this idea of Joe Biden. Do you think we will see him doing more, Chris Wallace sit downs, hard-hitting interviews in the vein that President Trump, to a degree, has done?
Well, first of all, is it about rights or is it about responsibility? It's about both. And the fact is, these debates get truncated, especially in this election year when everybody's looking for whose side are you on? You got to be all for rights or all for responsibility. Why can't you be for both? That's what we're talking about. This is very much like a Second Amendment debate over the vigilantes. The Second Amendment does say you can have your right to a regulated militia. Not just a bunch of vigilantes on the street, a regulated militia. Let's have some regulation. Same thing with the masks. The mask for the issue of public safety. You want to go out in public, you've got a public safety responsibility under the law. But, again, reporters want to get a yes or no quick answer on these kind of things, and we oversimplify it. But the fact is, I think Joe Biden scored a lot of points by simply being reasonable. After 4 years of what a lot of people perceive as craziness out of the White House, seeing somebody try to make some sense right now gets respect. And we still got a ways to go here with these issues as we look to see who do you turn to as an authoritative voice. I think Joe Biden is quietly authoritative. He's not yelling a lot of gibberish. He is making sense. And President Trump can no longer cover for the fact that he's not familiar with the issues, and he needs to be.
Okay.
I agree with everything. I agree with everything Clarence just said. And the notion that you are equating strength with Donald Trump, who is out there totally unhinged in many of his comments. He's talking about a plane load of anarchists dressed in black heading to make big trouble. Where did he pick that up? He picks things up from the internet and he spreads them around.
Look,
and you call that
Biden
strength?
has done extremely well
I don't.
by hiding in his basement. If I were
You're not hiding anymore, Pat.
I would tell Biden, stay in the basement. It's where you belong.
I have one more sentence.
All right.
Avoid these interviews.
Guys, we're going to charge
if Trump
onwards.
were leading in the polls, he'd been hiding in the White House.
All right. Enough of the hiding. All right. We're going to move on to issue 3, full COVID, and let's slip the election.
The good news, COVID cases across the nation appear to be flattening out. The bad news, the Midwest is still struggling with the virus. But with schools and colleges returning to session, fears over the future are becoming very present concerns. President Trump aims to overcome these challenges with his quote-unquote Operation Warp Speed strategy to get a vaccine to the American people by 2021. Space-time manipulation aside, there's some good news on this count. 2 vaccines are already in stage 3 testing, and there is reason to think a vaccine may indeed be available for emergency use before the year's end.
Clarence, your thoughts on the final 2 months before the election and how President Trump can try and pare back some of the responsibility narrative that perhaps Joe Biden has usurped from him on this issue?
You mean, I'm sorry, responsible leadership, you mean? Or who's to blame? Because that's what President Trump usually focuses on. And it's unfortunate. But the fact of the matter is, we have a lot of confusion right now over whether schools should reopen or not. Schools that are open, some of them have had to close again, either for a brief spell or undetermined. A big reason for that is there's a national confusion over our lack of national leadership. And so we're just feeling along in a state and locally based set of strategies and hoping for the best. I think that's where we've seen President Trump get his biggest hits as far as his approval ratings go. And gets back to what I was talking about before. Biden can score the most points by simply being a quiet leader who knows what he's talking about.
Kerry, your thoughts on how President Trump can perhaps gain some momentum here on this COVID leadership point?
Well, one thing's for sure is to certainly keep on more on the updates as to where we are on the vaccine. Already, we've learned that the United States is not going to be signing on with the World Health Organization team when it comes to their vaccines because they don't trust the corruption that is going on over at the World Health Organization. And even Dr. Fauci right now seems confident that a vaccine is more than likely going to probably at least emerge towards the end of the year. So that is something that is at least very optimistic. One other thing, as far as the schools are concerned, that one thing that is very necessary is that the Congress does pass some sort of relief that of the skinny bill that is the coronavirus relief, because there's $105 billion in there for the schools that has yet to be passed, and unfortunately the lawmakers are still stalling on it.
Eleanor.
Nowhere is it more apparent that this president has no plan than with the opening of schools. In 36 states, colleges tried to open. They've reported 8,600 cases of coronavirus. The president has sidelined Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and brought on a new coronavirus doctor, supposed expert that he saw on Fox, who questions the efficacy of masks. The White House has pressured the FDA to come out with this antibody test that they've supposedly revolutionary that they had to backtrack on. President has no credibility with any of this, but you know there will be lots of promises. The danger here is the American public doesn't have any trust in what they hear from the White House, and probably not either from the agencies either, because he has so undermined them.
Mr. Buchanan, final thoughts from you.
I think on this, I tend to agree somewhat with my colleagues in this sense. Look, Donald Trump, he has put all his chips into the middle of the table. He is for opening up the country and not closing it up again. Now, a number of these schools have been opening. Others have gotten spikes and closed. That's where they're going. Those are decisions of the 48 governors and the heads of school districts around the country. As for the vaccine, again, I think all of us pray that you get something before November 3rd. I think all of us pray for that, quite frankly. But the sooner we get it, the better. But we don't know these things. But again, I will say this about Trump. He puts his chips on the line. He tells you what he thinks. He says, here's where we ought to go. And what does he get from Biden? Back in the basement.
All right. Predictions, Pat.
I think the United States is going to sustain a defeat at the United Nations when our own European allies, Germany, France, and Britain, join Russia and China and say they're not going to reimpose sanctions on Iran for violating the Iran nuclear deal. It's going to be a setback, and it could lead to some real clashes.
I think you're right about that. Eleanor.
President Trump puts all the chips on the line, and he's been putting all his chips on the line for a V-shaped recovery. He won't get it. He'll get a K-shaped recovery with the bottom half left behind. You've got too many jobs lost. We're almost 13 million jobs in the hole. Many more businesses are going to be closing, and they're not coming back. However many chips he can put out there, he can't produce a win.
Kerry.
Given the association that BLM has had to the riots, not just this past few months, but going back to 2014 during Ferguson, I think that governments, corporations, and schools will quietly disassociate themselves from the BLM branding after the election, and we will hear very little from them as they try to rebrand themselves.
Clarence Page.
I predict that the Trump administration's advisor, Scott Atlas, advisor on the coronavirus crisis, will push a strategy that sounds very much like herd immunity, which is what Sweden has done. But he denies it. He's already been asked about this. But I think we're going to find a new debate emerging because the administration's overall policy does appear to be guided by that. And we will see in coming weeks as that this could become a campaign issue.
I predict that in the vein of the expulsions of Russian intelligence officers following the poisoning of Sergei Skripal in 2018, the finding by the German government that Alexei Navalny was poisoned by the same neurotoxin Novichok agent class will result in a similar countermeasure by the NATO member states. Thank you very much for watching.